Hello and welcome. This is video number 2 in a 5-part series about nationalism. And in today's video, we're going to talk about the small Germanic state of Prussia and its role in creating the unification of the country we know today as Germany. And nationalism will be a driving force in the unification of Germany. So we're going to use that as an example to try to illustrate how nationalism can work. So with that, we'll get started. All right, so again, nationalism in Prussia. Now, a little bit of background. If you go back to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, one of the things you might recall was an effort by traditional leaders in Europe to try to restore things back to normal, back to the way they'd been before the French Revolution. One of the things that they tried to do when they were trying to kind of reset Europe was they were trying to create some balance in the power throughout Germany, and in particular with attention due to the fact that France was by far the largest country, and they wanted to not have France be in a position where it might act aggressively again, at least anytime soon. And so one of the things they did to try to create somewhat of a balance of power in Europe was to create the German Confederation, which was somewhat of a loose union of German states. One of those states was named Prussia. And I'm not saying Russia with an R and mispronouncing it a little bit. We're talking Prussia, starting with the letter P. It was a relatively small Germanic state, and it will be from this that we'll see German unification take place. Now, within this German Confederation that formed going back to 1815, and keep in mind we're moving ahead, we're at mid-century during the 1800s at this point, Prussia would prove to be the dominant and become the dominant state within this loose union of other German states. And some of the reasons why Prussia had the advantage that enabled it to be a dominant state was, for starters, they had a predominantly German population. One of the things about that is it meant that a lot of common characteristics to people would truly be consistent and same throughout Prussia. That doesn't necessarily mean it made Prussia better because they were like that, or if a place is worse if they're not like that. But as far as cohesiveness and having people likely desire the same kinds of things, then that's going to go up if you have people that are predominantly from the same background, in this case, a Germanic background. They also had a powerful army relative to the rest of the German states. So if they were interested in using any kind of muscle or any kind of force for something, they were certainly better positioned than their neighbors around them for that. And they were also very industrialized compared to many of the German states. And so their capacity to produce things that they wanted and needed was definitely higher than their neighbors. So especially depending on what it was that they maybe needed to produce, they were well positioned for that. So if they had ambitious goals, for example, it's possible that those might align with much of the population, and their capacity to work towards those goals and have the resources they need to work towards those goals were very good. Now, talking about the mid-1800s, 1848 was kind of a weird year in Europe. There were a lot of uprisings, kind of government overthrow attempts, and one of the things that happened in a lot of different countries, and it really varied what happened from country to country, was steps were taken to try to bring about order. And in Prussia, what ultimately came of the 1848-1849 kind of uprising phase was putting together a liberal constitution. And by saying they put together a liberal constitution, basically what this really meant for Prussia is they had somewhat of a balanced government structure between having a king that had all the power versus having all the power in the hands of some kind of elected legislative body. They really kind of had a blend at this point. So one of the interesting things about that is, depending on who you were, you might have felt either very good about this or maybe not so great. If you were somebody like the king or someone sympathetic with the king, if there was an advantage or something that was a positive, is the king did have actual power. If there was something of an obstacle or a disadvantage, it's that power was limited by some of the rules and guidelines of the Constitution. Now, where that would be the biggest deal would be what the ambitions of, say, the king might be. Now, early on, there wasn't a whole lot of action in Prussia, especially regarding anything like attempting to unify German states together. But with the passing of power from one king to another, things would begin to change. Wilhelm I would come to lead Prussia as its king starting in the 1860s. And he definitely had more ambition and goals for maybe something a little more significant than maybe had been true with his predecessor. And one of the ways you can see these ambitions in action, at least, or attempt to be in action, was in his desire to bring about some reforms to the military within Prussia, and in fact, an attempt to double the size of the army of Prussia. Now, keep in mind that Prussia already had a military that was more significant than most of the people around them, and so he was hoping to make that even more significant. Now, the parliament, who he needed approval from to do something like this, to get the funds, if nothing else, said no to his desire to get money to do this. And one thing that I think is important to point out is it shouldn't be terribly surprising that the parliament would say no. One of the real challenges of governing, and really one of the challenges of living on planet Earth, is we have unlimited wants, yet we have limited resources. And in terms of what Prussia had, even though they maybe had advantages compared to a lot of their neighbors, they did not have unlimited resources. And it would probably make a lot of sense if you were a member of parliament who was trying to think about, using resources wisely, and you've got a request in to really increase funding for the military, and you think, well, gosh, our military is already more robust than a lot of the people around us. Why would we need to do something like that? So objectively, it shouldn't be too surprising that Parliament didn't really see eye to eye with Wilhelm's ambitions, but this would prove to be really important for some of the steps that take place moving forward. One thing that I think is important to note is even though initially the king might not have had majority support, he had some very important strategic support for some of his ambitions. The term up there that looks like Junkers is pronounced Junkers, and what that term means or represents were Prussian nobles. So people who were of the noble class, people who were kind of a step away from being royal family kind of people, generally supported the king and what the king was about. And also some of the lead people within government and certainly within the military were also supportive of the ambitions of Wilhelm I. And so even though he might have had some opposition to his ideas and his ambitions, strategically placed throughout Prussia, he had the support he needed. And this is where we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and leave it off here at this point. The next video will continue the topic of German unification, and it will start off with a person who ends up becoming really significant to the process itself, a person named Otto von Bismarck. So thank you for tuning in and watching this video. I hope it's been helpful and informative to get a little background on Prussia and how it was positioned as a place to potentially try to unify the German states. And hopefully you'll join me in the next video where we talk about the role Bismarck played in actually bringing the German states together into the country we know today as Germany. Thanks for watching.